I named the video The Metaphysics of Van Gogh because I couldn't for a while grasp how his consciousness was able to create profound works of art that weren't relevant during his lifetime. And now in the modern, postmodern world, they have become a staple of cultural significance. He is an example of what human beings are capable of in both their positive aspects and their negative aspects, so creation and destruction. And I'm not saying negative as in a term to cause judgment that it was bad or anything. I'm just showing, trying to decipher the relationship between artistry and creation, as well as destruction of the self or of the world around us. Now, I did try and study, I guess, a bit before I made this video, but most of this video will just be sort of a somewhat premeditated ramble or tangent. The main sources I'm going to be using for this video is going to be my brain, this book that I was very kindly given, as well as a few things on the internet. I first want to start by describing sort of the very basic and foundational principles of metaphysics. So metaphysics is a foundational branch of philosophy which explores the relationship between reality, existence, and the universe. And it also examines the relationship between mind and matter, exploring the relationship of consciousness. So me as in, I have one set of consciousness, you have your own consciousness, and then the world in many of its aspects has its own sort of through line of consciousness. Now, the most known things about Van Gogh is obviously his beautiful works of art, but also how he passed away. I will get into a little bit after, I guess, the tragedy that was his death, but I first wanted to touch on the beauty that was his life. Vincent van Gogh was an artist and just a natural born storyteller who was here to imbue meaning in existence. He was here to illustrate some fragment of existence that was ignored for a very long time. And during his time, he wasn't probably acknowledged as the incredible artist that he's known as today. It's a little less known fact that he was born with a natural talent of the written word and language. He would write to his brother quite frequently, describing his relationship with art and how he viewed art, how he understood tone and color and mood and atmosphere, and how he would translate his passion for art into this more technical framework that he was predisposed in having skill at, I guess. It's also quite well known that he wasn't respected much as an artist at that time. I think this is the crux of my ultimate question of how he managed to render himself so significant in a culture whilst during his life, none of his desires, not none of them, but his desires for some sense of recognition never materialized. And upon reflection and of reading this, I think the answer is that he, above anything, cared about creation and cared about making art no matter the cost. He was incredibly disciplined and dedicated to improving his skills and into trying to convey what it was that was going on in his head. He wrote very long, beautiful prose and letters to his brother. Van Gogh wrote regularly to relatives and artist friends, but the vast majority of his letters were addressed to his favorite brother, Theo. Together, they form what is perhaps the most frank and unique body of artist correspondence ever written. One that offers, moreover, a rare insight into Vincent's mental turmoil and artistic motivations. The fact that his letters still speak to our imagination today does not only reflect the fluency of his pen and lyrical and compelling style of his writing, and his ability to structure a letter capable of holding the reader's interest from start to finish, it is also due to the way he pours out his soul, so that we get to know the artist as a human being, a person unable to escape himself who doggedly pursued his goal, even if he was unsure at first quite what that goal might be. There's so many quotes, like the book kind of is divided in this very comforting, I don't know, I find a very mentally comforting way of like pictures and short quotes. It's not a dense read at all. The most dense part of this book is at the very beginning, where it's like 3 pages of that. So it's not a challenging read. I'm assuming where this was bought was like probably like a museum, you know, one of those shops in the museum. Yeah, it's genuinely a great, and I love the color. Actually, the color is something interesting I was reading about. There were, you know, in the Starry Night, I might try and insert a photo. Beautiful rich yellow stars that kind of swirl and fall into the sky and get mixed in with it. There is a little bit of a sad but interesting sort of aspect to that. It was believed, there was two governing theories. One, he drank absinthe or liquor. This is the less regarded theory, but he drank absinthe, and one of the effects of absinthe could be sort of slurred vision or a heightened perception of colors like yellow, but that theory was quickly dismissed because it would require an obscene amount of absinthe to get you to that point. So the second theory, and the more believed theory, is that he was medicated on a drug called digitalis. Let me see. Yeah, digitalis. And they imbued everything with this sort of yellowish, rich hue. The sunflower is another motif he has, which carries that vibrant yellow throughout it. And I think it's interesting when you consider the sort of depravity, or not the depravity, but the darkness that was used to form such a bright color. We associate a color yellow with the sun, with happiness. The yellow itself is kind of connotes good and pleasure and desire, but it can also be translated in, when you get those different hues of yellow, that sort of greenish yellow, it can feel nauseating, a bit sickening. And I think that's a very interesting display of how these more darker emotions humans feel on a regular basis can be sort of translated into something that is quite bright and rich. I think another part of his artistry, which is so fascinating, is how he was so deeply sad, but the art he produced was so full of life. It was so vital. It was so energetic in a way. He would paint moments of stagnancy that were rushing with feeling. And I think that's probably the greatest detriment that artists face, is that they feel so much. Personally, I get overrun with my emotions. I'm an incredibly sensitive person. And for a very long time, I sort of really hated that quality about myself. People would always point out how sensitive I was. And I took it kind of as an insult. But being able to reflect on artists who have, all of the greatest works of art required a high level of sensitivity to produce them in the first place, you know? Sensitivity in this modern culture, nonchalantness is sort of revered, you know, it's seen as this pinnacle of human existence, and we all need to strive to this like North Star of not caring about anything and anyone. And while you shouldn't be preoccupied with other people, this sensitivity has always made me feel a little bit misplaced in a way. I felt a bit burdened, and then became a burden because I didn't know how to control or navigate these dense emotions. And I'm pretty sure those are feelings that a lot of artists have. So back to my question on the metaphysics of Van Gogh. How did someone with such parasitic sort of frames of mind manage to stare himself into the creation of art? And I think the answer is pretty simple. I think because he didn't believe in himself. He believed in what art was. He believed in the essence of art, and therefore he embodied it. There's a beautiful quote at the beginning of this book. Almost no one knows that the secret of beautiful work is to a large extent good faith and a sincere feeling. And I think he embodied that more than anything. He embodied this sort of richness that was art, this flow. He immersed himself in nature and spent lots of time walking and sort of observing the natural patterns and natural rhythms of the climate of the world. He was in solitude for most of the time, and solitude can be incredibly isolating and incredibly distressing, but ultimately you're the only one in it, you know. Solitude kind of creates this almost atmosphere and this containment, where you can sort of revel in your own delusion, disillusion, whimsy, and inescapable joy, and it kind of creates a bubble. And it's weird. I think modern society is incredibly dislodged, dislocated, where we all kind of have interaction with each other, especially on something like social media and day-to-day life, but we all do feel a level, I believe, a sort of isolation, that the world is kind of disconnected from us. And I think there isn't a sort of size-fits-all solution of this is sort of your medication and this is how you can prescribe, sort of fix your own internal mental treachery. But I do believe that humans have been given a great gift to be able to not only exist as art, but be conscious of it. We are consciously creating our art, unlike a lot of art that just exists, without humans touching. I think nature is an example of the greatest works of art that ever exists. But nature isn't conscious of itself making itself, if that makes sense. Humans have that unique capacity that I do think distinguishes us from the rest. We have an almost autonomy over our actions and how we can move throughout the world. But the issue with modern society, or from my view, is this inherent subjectivity that we're stuck in. We are stuck, as I am me and you are you, and you can't really do much to change that. But because attention has become such a vital resource, attention is probably the most crucial resource we have at the moment. And because that is known, it is then exploited from us. There are so many things that you can use to distract your awareness away from the reality of the world. I myself am a very big sort of fantastical person. I sort of live in the land of delusion and I run off into my bubble and I sort of block out the rest of the world whilst being so deeply entrenched within it. And I think this sort of juxtaposition is something that needs to be understood clearer or remedied more, or at least spoken about to some extent, devoid of judgment. Judgment can kind of come second to that, if that makes sense. We discuss these issues and we make judgment calls on what's the best thing and so forth. My sort of armchair diagnosis of Van Gogh is one that is, he had a very low sense of self. So this self that is rooted in our interactions and our mediation between other people and the external world. Maybe not the external world for him, but how he was perceived by other people was a massive blockage in some ways for him. He writes about it occasionally. He tries to distract himself and forget sort of the opinions of others. And I think this is an incredibly relatable point, honestly. I find myself sometimes deeply entrenched in anything I do and how that might be perceived by others. And it creates this echo chamber because people will not see it clearly until it sort of ultimately comes to fruition. Or people do see it, there's some people that do see it. I think the world we're living in today is far more open-minded in a sense, where there is much more diversity of thought, opinion, people, places, things. We've got the internet, so we've got this sort of unlimited access to any system you could possibly think of, anything you could find or curate, you can tap into it. But the blockage with the internet is that it is known, and so it's very carefully orchestrated, so it disempowers you rather than it empowers you. But this notion of being perceived by others, I think that was his main blockage, and on top of that, the mental illness with just no resources to navigate. He had to sort of find vices, I guess, to cope with the existential horror that is existence. And I think humans, myself included, have a hard time grappling with this sort of ephemerality, the fact that we will eventually sort of dissipate into nothingness and anything we do is ultimately dust. And something like the internet almost heightens that factor because we have such a deep sort of need for vitality, for virality. And I think that's something that makes also Van Gogh so interesting, is there wasn't this notion, I guess, this concept of virality as we have today. There wasn't this sort of existential doom with having to be known and seen and the most liked. He just wanted to be, I guess, acknowledged in some capacity, or to just make art that was art and seen as art. But in the landscape that he was living in, that wasn't afforded the fact. There was a more emphasis on this, I think it was realism at the time. I'm gonna try and fact check that. But it was real, and that was sort of the revered art style at the time. It wasn't respected at the time. It wasn't seen as skillful or what have you. And I think he had to be authentic before the term authenticity even was born. You know, now it's sort of a clicking point. But yeah, no, he was deeply authentic before that was ever socially acceptable. I guess there wasn't a resource like the internet he could turn to, or he just knew that art was his authentic expression in whatever form that was, and he just had an insane sort of insatiable hunger to paint. He kind of stopped at nothing to create endlessly, and I think that's so beautiful. And it is a privilege almost that we are not afforded in this modern age with so many copious distractions. We have any distraction under the sun. And myself most potently gets sort of lost in the maze of things I could possibly be doing. And then sometimes get sort of swept up in these little rabbit holes of thoughts and opinions and things that ultimately don't benefit me at all. And art is like truly a medicine for the soul, because it allows you to express what is very difficult to articulate or requires intense precision to articulate. It's sort of this unknowing, known fact that we all sort of live with, that what we're going through is kind of, it's not meaningless, because it's not meaningless. There are a lot of things you can do to create meaning, but one of those primary tools is the expression of art. And I can't imagine living in a world where you are so deeply enamored with this practice, but there's almost no one you can sort of point and try and find that will eventually understand you. I think a massive privilege I have is the internet. As much as I might feel misunderstood or not fully actualized in my being, I do have this ability to film myself, and as poorly made as it is, there will be someone who sits there and can resonate with what it is I'm saying. And this is a great, great privilege, I believe. It's a privilege that I take a little bit lightly. Sometimes I don't appreciate, the fact that 3 people have sat there and maybe read a poem that I've written, or interacted with my existence to some capacity, because it's so common and it's so normalized now that sort of anything that is under 20,000 followers or whatever is not even, it's considered sort of nothing. But the amount of people that would take, especially if someone like Van Gogh had like 600 people, I have 600 people that follow me on my Instagram. If Vincent Van Gogh had 600 people that could sort of look at his art and could express anything, that sure, there would be people that didn't like it, but a variety of reactions. I wonder what that would have done for his soul. I think in many ways he's this testament of strength in humanity and in the human psyche, but he's also a testament of how weak, not weak, I don't think he was weak, but how weak the human brain can be, how unable of perceiving his own brilliance it can be. He really trusted in his art, and I think that's what made him, I think that's what made him a legacy, honestly, was this deep devotion. He almost existed in this state where he wasn't consciously thinking to himself, he existed in this state of almost self-limitation consciously. He consciously lived in self-limitation, but subconsciously, he knew what he was doing was correct. He wrote about feeling like he was on the right path, and that path never bore fruits of its labor, properly in his actual life. But once he died, everyone respects him. Everyone sees the value in what he said and what he created. And it's a very haunting and sad fact in a way, to not be acknowledged in your lifetime, and then after your life you are revered. And I know he wasn't the only person that sort of suffered with this. Death creates this profound shift where sometimes people only just start caring once someone has died. They only see their humanity once they're void of it, And that's a very sad fact of human nature in a way, is like sometimes someone's value is so heightened, but we don't have the ability or the awareness or the foresight to see the greatness within it. And I think I mean, others to different extents, but people also sort of struggle to see their own greatness in many ways. Yeah, he was way ahead of his time. He was ahead of his time before that phrase would probably even existed. I wrote in my diary, I don't think there's much I can say in my diary. I wrote in my journal, in my book, and whatever. There's not much I could say which will be new or novel. But I think trying to find that would be going against the nature of the message of his art. He used nature as a vehicle of inspiration, and along with that comes imperfection. His art had these shaky lines and these sort of blurred images, and everything was kind of skewed and like looked like you were looking through it with a lens or through a memory, or just a rapid sort of need to create something. This sort of rabid feeling of I need to express myself in some capacity, otherwise I will burst. And I think that's so potent. While I observe his art, it's still, and it's yet so full of movement. The objects are full of life. The rooms are colored in character, and they become a person in a way. They become personified in their existence. He saw himself in these inanimate objects, and I think that is a lost art. Being able to observe yourself in things that don't have this human capacity, this human form to it. Like I'm looking at this. It's a funny sort of vase. Not funny vase, it's a very beautiful vase, it's gorgeous, but the light reflects in it, sort of, I can see myself in it. There's all these different cutouts and shades and colors, and it scintillates in some parts, darker and gray and, you know, a bit dead, and then there's this beautiful burst of color, a feather, like there's so much. There's so much of the self to be observed in the outside world, in the natural world. And we have to almost acknowledge that even in this sort of ceramic cinderbox, cement-driven landscape that we kind of occupy now, there is also a lot of humanity to be observed there. Kind of like with Vincent van Gogh existing in this duality of both being an exceptionally driven and disciplined artist, but also someone that suffered from horrific mental afflictions. Humans are both capable of massive change and upheaval, and, you know, for the better, but we're also capable of incredible destruction. And the more we sort of come to grips with our innate hypocrisy, I think the world would become a much more honest place. I think another thing that we have at the moment, which I think is a beautiful thing, is, again, this diversity. There isn't just one art style that you can occupy, that you can be, you can create. You know, there's a plethora of it now. And I think the modern issue is trying to find yourself and position yourself exactly where you feel like that expression is authentic to you. I'm someone who likes multitudes of things. I'm very unspecific. I've been told many times that I'm not great with specificity. I'm a very broad person in a way. I like a lot of different things, and I'm almost constantly got my finger in all the pies, and I haven't fully eaten any of them. And that is both a strength and a weakness, depending on your perspective. But I do think it's a beautiful thing that we can have so many different expressions of art and so many different voices that can be sort of channeled through the medium of art without this one pillar of this is the only correct way to do art, as it was at his time. You know, it wasn't trendy or it wasn't cool to be an expressionist. It was only cool to be an expressionist once the wave of expressionism came back. And I think that's incredibly detrimental to, like, human psyches, is having to fit into one specific mold constantly and having to continuously validate yourself on this trip of this is the sort of archetype I occupy, and staying very stuck and stagnant in that. That being said, obviously there's some people who are very specific. They're very specific on who they are and what they stand for. And I have certain qualities of that, but having a sort of a broad complexity for understanding of other people's experiences and other people's internal world makes your own much richer, I do believe. He didn't run from imperfection, and I think that's a lesson that I need to learn at least. He didn't run from making things look sort of scattered and very, very deeply human, but also incredibly inhuman in a way. Not inhuman, just, what's the word? Imaginative? Yeah, very imaginative. It's like he walks this fine line between, it really is like a memory, like I said before. Yeah, he didn't run from imperfectionism, and I think that's another thing that sort of allowed him to sprout into this great legacy, this icon that is known today, is because he didn't try and contort himself into this perfectly categorized box. The only mission he had was to become better and better at it, and to improve and to excel in this medium, regardless of what other people thought, as much as it did sort of occupy some aspect of his mental landscape. And I think it's a great lesson to hold and to learn, is how can I separate myself? How can I understand and consider the perspective of others, but sort of continue my pursuit in a very almost bullish manner of this is where I'm going, this is what I want to achieve. It's a fine balance you kind of need to understand and hold, because on one hand, if you're incredibly purely individualistic, that creates in itself a cacophony of issues and creates this hyper-individualist, hyper-capitalist pursuit of self-actualization as in detriment to others. So there's that. But also you need to not take other people's opinions as a capital T truth, because again, it's ultimately a perspective. Yeah. Oh, is that right? I guess I kind of now want to a little bit hyper focus a bit more on his suffering, because I do think it's a very crucial point of his story that can't really just be neglected. I think he had manic depression, which a lot of creative people struggle with, and it is an insane sort of trip to be on, really. You will either be sort of invigorated with feelings of complete euphoria in either self or self-expression, creating, or even learning. I think there's something very euphoric about learning something new. Once you've kind of dismantled these mental blockages in your head. This suffering he had, struggled with alcohol and drug use, very common problems. And on top of that, we have we have technology, we have gambling, we have money. Money is a whole drug in and of itself. There are all these negative loops and negative spirals you can be caught into, self-criticism. And these are all like programs that have been sort of sent out. And humans occupy them because existence is incredibly painful. Sometimes, not all the time. Yeah, all these devices trap us in this echo chamber, in this the egregore, and we continuously perpetuate them because change requires change, and change is difficult, and change can be scary, and change requires a level of self-authorship which is incredibly confronting. I used to be a person who kind of professed that I would never exercise. I hated exercise. I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me. And it was funny because I did grow up as a very a child that was put into exercise and did exercise. But I developed a very strong hatred for physical discipline. And I'm still trying to get over that. I go to the gym as much as I can. I'll go today. But it is very easy to catch yourself and to bring yourself down into, this is not possible for me and I can't do this. And I feel like it doesn't seem like he was afflicted with, I can't do this. He kind of set the bar very high for himself, Van Gogh. He set the bar very high for himself, and he strived for greatness. But his main problem was the external world telling him that what he was doing was not good enough. And I think many of us, or many people just in general, can relate to that problem, being sort of invalidated a lot, unable to trust your own internal compass to guide you where you need to be going. His story is one of great sadness, but ultimately great inspiration. I think he manages to stay so relevant because of this deep devotion. Because he was trying, you know, he was trying to get better. He was trying to make more of himself. He was trying to be great, and that attempt, although it didn't, again, come to fruition in his current life, he very much occupied a space of great significance. His determination, although he wasn't there to witness it, ultimately did manifest itself. So my deeper question is, was it him, or was it the world he was living in that wasn't allowing him to birth into what he is known as today? And I think the answer is a subtle dance between the two. He had a lot of self-criticism and struggled with his own afflictions, but the world kept mirroring to him that he wouldn't make it and he couldn't make it, and he wasn't good enough and he wasn't talented enough or skilled enough to make it. And I think he believed it. I genuinely think he created out of this deep passion, but the deep passion was what brought him to life after death. This deep passion created the nerve that is the works of Van Gogh. This greatly influential vessel that sort of permeates his work. It's like, you can't, this is how I see it. The world was like, no, you suck. He then absorbed that criticism and was like, well, I suck. And then the world he was like, but I love art. And the world was like, yeah, but your art sucks. But he was like, yeah, I kind of suck, but I love art. And the world was like, your art sucks. Your art sucks, your art sucks, your art sucks. And the more he was told this, the deeper he believed it. But I think very deep down, he knew it didn't suck. He knew that there was something there. There was something so alive. He just couldn't, there was so many external noises that were drowning out his own potentiality to sort of change the wave of art whilst he was still alive. But unfortunately, the noise of the outside world ultimately got to him, as well as his own sort of inner demons. Because artists are incredibly vain. I can admit that as an artist. I'm incredibly self-absorbed and incredibly vain, and I sort of care very deeply about my work, and I care very deeply about my work and my expression. Green on my eyes to like be a little bit more artsy, I don't know. He was incredibly vain. It's like vain in this selfless way, because you're like devoting all of your time and energy into creating something beautiful because you deep down don't think that you are enough as it is. I mean, that's how anything's created, really. No, that's not true. So many thoughts, most of them probably not correct. A quote that I read that I found deeply real but deeply sad was, if I could have worked without this accursed disease, what things I might have done. That for me feels like a warning. And it's crazy because he's created such a vast body of work, but it really does sort of, mental health issues really do strip you of this awareness, of this vitality, and you limit yourself and you don't do it as much as you know you can. It's incredibly confronting to know that, you know, there are all these things externally or even internally within your own psyche that are stopping you from the reaching for medicine, you know, stopping you from finding the cure. To end, I want to share maybe some of my favorite quotes. Oh, this is nice. I'm an artist, which I won't take back, because those words naturally imply always seeking without ever fully finding. Oh, that's pretty. I like that. This is cool. Sketch that he did. I like the colors. I don't know, it's very satisfying how this is made. Thank you to the person. If you're watching this, thank you. I believe that at present we must paint nature's rich and magnificent aspects. We need good cheer, happiness, hope, and love. How much there is in art that is beautiful, If only we can remember what one has seen. One is never empty or truly alone. This one's kind of cool. It is no easier, I'm convinced, to make a good painting than to find a diamond or a pearl. Oh, this one might take the cake, low-key. Low-key. Art is jealous and demands all our time, all our strength. I'm learning that. That's so pretty. Okay, this is probably let me see if there's one more I can do, because I found like a good one to finish. Oh, that's gorgeous. Oh, that's so pretty. Oh, that's so pretty. I've never seen that one. That's really pretty. I have a terrible clarity of mind at times, when nature is so lovely these days, and then I'm no longer aware of myself, and the painting comes to me as if in a dream. Real. Yeah, that's pretty. It's not good to know only one thing. It stultifies one. One shouldn't rest until one knows the opposite. A sketch. That looks like something I've drawn. I think that's another thing about Van Gogh that I like. He's kind of relatable to me. Okay, this is my final quote. But the painter of the future is a colorist, such as there hasn't been before. If anything, these videos that I make are a practice of me trying to sustain my thoughts, trying to make my thoughts legible and tangible, and develop my verbal ability to articulate myself, because I spend a lot of time internally, and although I do write, I can tell that a lot of my capacity to articulate myself correctly is dying because of an over-reliance on these socially acceptable systems. Yeah, these videos, I hope that they progress. I see it as a timeline of progression, tracking my ability to use words in a way that can clearly and concisely and succinctly get my point across. And so if you watch these earlier videos, I appreciate you greatly, because they're frankly quite rubbish, but not rubbish, that's mean to say about myself, but they're not good yet. And I don't strive for this sort of perfect goodness, but I do strive for less shakiness and stuttering and self-doubt and limitation and denial and all those wonderful, horrific things that us humans have to navigate through. So yeah, it's a good exercise in that. Good exercise in public speaking, I guess. Because I find that in my own personal life, I talk a lot, but I am very tangential, as you can tell, and I don't stick to structure as much as I probably should. So this is almost demanding me to, in some way, structure my thoughts. And I do like the sort of lackadaisical sort of quality, lackadaisical. I do crave a little bit more richness and a little bit more mental aptitude, mental cognition of words and their effect. And I think watching myself and having to edit it really highlights to me the aspects of my behavior that I can start to adjust. So yeah, hope this made any sense. I hope this made sense. I hope you enjoyed it, gained something from it. Yeah. I appreciate anyone who does watch what I say, listens, I find it a privilege. It is a privilege to be listened to and acknowledged, especially in reflection of people who, like him, who didn't get that. Yeah. Bye.